Welcome to this Module 7 Special Edition Memorial Day for NTech 235. I hope you're all having a good weekend, and thanks for your service for those of you in active duty or veterans. Lots of different objectives in this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of these different objectives, but then I'm going to show you several demonstrations that will help you understand what it is that I talked about here. So there's a lot of migration discussion here. One is going to be an Azure migration. The other is going to be just on-premises Active Directory migration. And there's different ways to do each of these different types of migrations and for different reasons. So we've already talked about DHCP and IIS and ADDS, things like that. But we haven't really talked about how to move it in case we ever need to. And I've had this happen many times in my career, especially after I started a managed service, because I'd go to clients and they would get bought out or merge with another company, and they'd have to have Active Directory merged because of it, as well as their Azure services that they've been purchasing. So legacy system migration, you've got to be able to migrate from older systems to avoid any security vulnerabilities. So if you are, say you have an older version of Active Directory and Windows Server and you're merging with another company that has newer, then you want to make sure that everything gets migrated properly before you have any types of merger happening between the two. So we've got Windows Server Migration Tool, that's the WSMT. Azure Migrate, that's the one that can help you migrate from on-premises into Azure. So DHCP, you need to have administrative permissions for either domain admin or delegated rights to authorize or deauthorize a DHCP server in Active Directory. DHCP will not hand out IP addresses if it's not authorized. And once you authorize it, it can hand out IPs, but if it detects a rogue DHCP server, it's going to automatically stop working. It's going to deauthorize itself. So it's sort of a protection mechanism within DHCP. And when you're all done with the DHCP server, you can deauthorize it as well. So you've got to stop the DHCP services and export the configuration if you're going to replace your DHCP server with a new one. So you stop the services just by right-clicking on the DHCP server and choosing All Tasks Stop, and then make sure it's stopped, and then you can go ahead and export the configuration. So you can just export it right within DHCP, or you can install the Windows Server Migration tool in order to do that export and import configuration. This is a tool that's free. You can download it from Microsoft, and what it does is it allows you to migrate from one company to another. And just to give you a couple of examples, so one of the times that Channel 6, which is Coin, got sold to another company, the parent company unfortunately left them orphaned. So they took their parent Active Directory and just left. And the Coin Active Directory that was left over was a child Active Directory setup, and means that it had no rights to really do anything. So they really did a bad job leaving that particular TV station when they moved on. So what I had to do was I had to create a brand new Active Directory, and then I had to migrate everyone from the orphaned domain into the new parent domain, and then delete the orphaned domain once it was done. And it took a couple of weeks to get that done, a lot of planning ahead of time. We had to do it in phases. We couldn't do everybody's at once because they had 150 computers, and sometimes during the day, or actually anytime during the day, somebody was having a busy part of their day and we couldn't really interrupt them. So we had to do some of these in the middle of the night, some of them during the morning, some in the afternoon. But eventually we got them all moved over to the new domain. But the good thing about the WSMT, the Windows Server Migration Tool, is it allowed us to do all this work without bringing down the domain. Everyone could continue to work. So we also have something called a print server. Now, not everybody uses print server. Ever since Print Nightmare came out a few years ago, Print Nightmare is a vulnerability that Microsoft was just unable to patch. It allowed any type of printer that was joined to Active Directory as a resource or as an object to be used as a way to take over the domain. And since there was no way to really fix it, a lot of sysadmins, actually most sysadmins, went ahead and just started directly mapping printers through scripts in Active Directory through group policy for all the different users. So that's a great way to get around Print Nightmare, but some people believe they're just not really a target for Print Nightmare. Somebody has to be on site in order to really take advantage of this. It is possible to do it remotely, but it's much more effective on site. So some people have kind of gone back to the printer sharing within Active Directory and Windows servers. And so you might come across a couple of different ways. So let's just assume that you are going to come across sysadmins using the print management utility. So I'm going to show you a little demonstration later on of what that is and how that works. So once you set up your printer configuration, let's say you need to move this information to a new server because of a merger, an acquisition, or just a retired server. Well, you can export all the different settings in print management. And what that includes is it's going to include the names of the shared printers, their IP addresses, their drivers, and you're going to have drivers for multiple different operating systems that you can add into this print configuration utility. And then you don't want to have to recreate all that because sometimes you might have dozens of printers and lots of custom configurations. So by being able to export that printer configuration to a new server, you're going to save a lot of time and not have any downtime because of it. So then you can import that information, install the print and document services role, ensure that it's ready to go, and then you can go ahead and import the exported file, and then you'll have all that information in there. Now you have to update your group policy as well because group policy is going to point you to specific servers where these printers are. So if your group policy is running behind, then you're going to end up having the users continue to look at the server that's no longer acting as a print server. So addressing compatibility issues, IP addressing and DNS considerations. Well, this happens a lot, once again, in mergers and acquisitions where you have one office with one subnet and set up, and then another office with another subnet, and you have to set up a VPN tunnel between the two. Well, one time I did have both of these offices just randomly during one of these types of setups. They both randomly were using 192.168.16, and it was crazy. And so I asked them, I said, hey, we're going to need to move one of you to a different subnet because you're both on the same subnet, and that's not going to allow us to do any routing. And they said, nope, both offices are going to need to continue to be running the same subnet because we don't want to interrupt anything. So I said, okay. So I put on Cisco firewalls on both sides and then created aliases. So what happened was on one side, I left them at 192.168.16. On the other side, I created this alias 192.168.17. So the users on the 16 side, when they were trying to connect to the other office with .16, were really connecting to this alias 17. And then the Cisco firewall then translated it back to 16 again. It all worked just fine, but it took weeks to come up with that solution and a lot of frustration. So IIS, Internet Information Services, this is the web server that's built into Windows Server. Now you're not going to find a lot of public websites that are on IIS because most developers and programmers who create these websites would rather do it on Linux. They're just used to it. It's more companies own Linux servers in the cloud when it comes to hosting websites, and so it's kind of a burden for these programmers who are already super lazy to begin with to be able to learn something new. So the only time you're going to see IIS or the Windows web server set up for for most companies is going to be for internal use. They're going to use it for internal applications that just use IIS as part of it. They're going to be using it maybe for some custom intranet sites for information about, say, HR or maybe other types of company information that just makes it make more sense to have it on an internal website on the company network that isn't going to be publicly facing. So you're still going to see these IIS websites. You're just probably not going to see them facing the public. It's just going to be for internal use. But because of the fact you are going to see it, you're going to need to migrate them to other servers. That might be migrating them to Azure, into a website there that is available, say, through a VPN tunnel back to the corporate LAN, or you're going to see it just on another IIS server, as one server gets retired for the other. So if you're going to use that, you can use the Azure migration tool to migrate your web apps, your websites, all those different things off to Azure when needed. So Azure App Services overview, you can take a look at the Azure App Services, its capabilities, by going to portal.azure.com and opening up the Azure App Services. And then you'll use Azure Migrate to migrate those web apps. So in order to use the Azure Migration Service, and we did look at this last week when it came to moving a virtual machine, but the Azure Migration Service can migrate a lot of different things. And one of those things is going to be IIS. So you're going to create a project in Azure Migrate, and then you're going to walk through a wizard that helps you migrate these web apps off of IIS into Azure, if that's what you're wanting to do. And then you're going to confirm the migration and test it all out. You can also migrate Docker containers. So Docker containers are going to be basically standard containers that used to be something that was just available in Linux, but now it's available in Windows Server as well. You can install the container feature if you'd like, and then run it all through PowerShell. Now, if you're going to use Docker Desktop or Docker installation, Docker Desktop is like a graphical version for you, so you don't have to do it all through PowerShell. Then that will work fine, but it will not do what's called virtual containers. Virtual containers don't share the kernel of the server. Regular Linux and standard containers, they do share the kernel of the server. So that means that they're not going to be quite as secure, but still very good. So what that all means is, let's say you're going to install regular containers. So if you're going to do that, you can install Docker, Docker Desktop, or Azure Kubernetes, any one of those, and then run those container images on your Windows servers. And the nice thing about using Kubernetes is you can easily migrate, and you can cluster and add redundancy to multiple different containers. The bad thing is that it's no longer available within Windows Server 2022 or 2025. They've gotten rid of it. So, as far as Azure Kubernetes. Now, Kubernetes is still available. Kubernetes was created by Google and then given off to the world as open source. So Microsoft took it upon themselves to make it an Azure service. So basically, it's an Azure service that you would rent by the month, but you could install it on your local computers. But because Microsoft just recently removed it within the last couple of months, which is why this is still showing it as available because it's a little older than that, then you're going to find that you just can't do Azure Kubernetes service anymore. So what they've moved it to is Windows Server HCI, hyper-converged infrastructure. So it's all PowerShell driven. It's no longer any type of graphical thing, and you have to rent the HCI operating system as well. But let's just say you're not going to use that because HCI is a pain, it's expensive, and you don't want to do everything command line driven. Well, you can use just plain old Kubernetes service. You can download and install Kubernetes onto your Windows Server 2025, and then instead of just having sort of a flat Docker container type of a thing, you can have a hierarchical Kubernetes service which acts much more like Windows failover cluster. You have nodes, and then you put containers in those nodes, and you can move them around at will or have them move around automatically whenever they discover that there's a server that's having an issue. Containers are going to be a big part of your jobs as sysadmins. So this is really something that you need to learn and learn well. Also virtual machines, of course, virtual machines on premises, virtual machines in the Azure cloud or AWS cloud, all very important for sysadmin, for modern sysadmin. It's possible and even likely that less than 50% of the companies that you go interview with are not really going to be in the cloud. They're not going to be using containers. They don't know what they are. That's fine. But you'd be much better off learning it and maybe even doing it on, you can install Docker Desktop on your Windows 11 or 10 computer if you want. Learning it, getting experience with it. And then if you end up going to work at a company that doesn't need it, okay, fine, no big deal. Maybe you could even introduce that to them and talk about the advantages. But if you do end up getting interviewed by a company that does use it, then you will be prepared. So not everybody does it in the cloud. Some people do it on Windows servers, some do it on Linux servers. But containerization is an important thing to understand for a modern sysadmin, just as much as virtual machines are. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this part of it since the Azure Kubernetes Service is no longer what it once was. And you can only do it within Azure now using that HCI operating system. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So let's move on to Active Directory Domain Services migration. So this is all on premises now. We talked about Azure before. Now we're and the hybrid configuration with some things on premises like DHCP, but now we're going to be talking about just on premises types of services. Very important stuff, especially with mergers and acquisitions. This tool, Active Directory Migration Tool, very important tool to understand. Now, you don't have to know the ins and outs of it. For me, I only use it every few years. So I have to, relearn it because they keep updating it. I have to relearn, exactly how to do it. You have to do things in a specific order. If you don't, then people will get cut off. So basically the job of Active Directory Migration Tool is to keep both forests and domains running while you migrate users from one location to another. And it's a very tricky type of a dance that you do in order to make this happen. I've done it with many companies over the years, but because it's kind of spread out sometimes over several years, I have to reread the directions and relearn, all of it, just to make sure that I'm doing things in the right order so I don't bring anybody down. It could cost the company tens of thousands of dollars to have a chunk of their organization down because you did Active Directory migration in the wrong order, just as an example. So first you install the Active Directory Migration tool on the source and the target server. So you find an Active Directory domain controller or a member server where you install this free tool from Microsoft, download it and install it, and then you get a trust going between these two forests and domains using this tool. And once that trust is there, you've got to decide. This is always a big decision when you have mergers and acquisitions. If you have an acquisition, it's pretty simple. The bigger company is going to swallow the smaller company. So the small company is going to have to join the bigger company's domain. But if you have a merger where both companies are roughly the same size, then it becomes a fist fight as to which Active Directory you're going to keep. And that makes it even more complicated when both organizations have Azure resources or AWS resources as well. So once that fist fight is done, then you can start migrating the tools towards the winning Active Directory site. And typically what happens, just so you know, during any type of merger, whichever site tends to lose that fist fight, most of the IT team just usually gets their feelings hurt and they end up leaving the company. So just be aware that that kind of stuff does happen. So there's lots of different things you have to merge here. You've got to or migrate. You've got to migrate the user accounts. You got to migrate groups. Anything that's considered an object, such as group policies, all those things have to be migrated from one to the other, unless you decide to no longer use them and just create new ones. I have had some very smart owners during a merger decide that they did not want this fist fight, and the the result was they created a brand new Active Directory domain and forest and just merged both companies into the new domain and forest rather than have a whole bunch of people leave the company because they got their feelings hurt. So you have to set up the migration. You have trust relationships. You got to be able to trust each other. It is a little bit tricky to have these trusts set up properly. So for instance, if you have a shared folder on a file and print server and you want to be able to have a user or a group in the other domain and forest to be able to get into that file share, then you have to set up the trust relationships. Once the trust relationships are set up using ADMT, excuse me, then you can see both domains. When you go to right-click on the folder, go to Properties, go to Sharing or Security tab, instead of seeing one domain, now you're going to see two domains. And then you're going to see the users and the groups in both domains, and you can add either domain into that file share. You can also export group policies. Now, group policies, sometimes there's a lot of thought and effort put into these group policies, and you want to be able to export and import them so you don't have to create them all over again. You want things to work exactly as they did. So exporting is pretty simple. Importing is pretty simple. The only thing is you want to test this all out in a test organizational unit before you apply this to a lot of people and computers. So now we have migrating to a new Active Directory forest. So there's a couple of different options here. There's the inter-forest and there's the intra-forest migration. I have never seen anyone do an intra-forest migration. Basically, you're keeping the same forest and you're just migrating one domain to another domain. Never seen it happen, probably never will. Inter-forest, that's during the mergers and acquisitions. That's where you have two completely separate forests and domains, and you're going to merge them together, and then eventually one of the domains is going to be deleted. That's the kind of scenario you're most likely going to see. Now, you can use PowerShell for doing these tasks. I prefer to use the ADMT just because it's graphical. It's a little easier to grasp what's actually happening. But if you feel like you need to use PowerShell, then you do have that option. You can also upgrade domain controllers. One thing to remember is that you cannot make the forest or the domain functional level, which greatly affects the security and group policies that you have. And I'll show you a demonstration of that. But you cannot have the functional level be higher than your oldest domain controller. So for instance, let's say your oldest domain controller on one of these companies is going to be 2012 R2. All right, well, hopefully that doesn't happen. But you're going to find a lot of companies use some really old technology. So if you have a domain controller that's 2012 R2, but you're running Windows Server 2022, then 2022's newest domain and functional level is going to be 2016. Microsoft skipped 2019 and 2022 and then jumped to a forest and domain functional level of 2025, which you'll see in a little bit. But the latest version for Windows Server 2022 is a forest and functional domain of 2016. So you don't want to upgrade your forest and functional level to 2016 if you have a 2012 R2 domain controller. Because you'll end up making that 2012 R2 domain controller stop working. And that's going to cause a lot of Active Directory problems. So you never want to go lower than whatever your lowest domain controller is. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have older servers. You can have 2008, 2003, 2000 servers if you want. They just can't be domain controllers. So I would recommend just demoting your 2012 R2 servers, or you could upgrade them to 2016 if you'd like. So in 2012, 2008, and 2003, Microsoft made two different versions of Windows Server. They had the first version, which they didn't really name anything other than just the name of the thing, such as 2003 or whatever. And then they had a second version. The second version was always considered R2 for Release 2. Now, ever since Windows Server 2012 R2, they stopped doing that. So 2016, 19, 22, and 25, there's just one release for those. When you do move to a new domain controller, say you're upgrading that 2012 R2 or just getting rid of it and going with a brand new 2016 server, you may need to transfer some master roles. And when that happens, there's 5 master roles, and those 5 master roles are very important. Otherwise, Active Directory will not work correctly. So if you are moving to a new domain controller and retiring an old one, and it has any of those master roles, then you've got to migrate them. So I'm going to show you in a demonstration later on how to migrate the master roles. So you can demote the legacy domain controllers just by going to Server Manager and then choosing the option to remove a service. So I will show you that as well. Now you can raise the functional level. So let's say, oh, I finally upgraded all my servers to Windows Server 2022 or 2025. Fantastic. You can raise the forest and domain functional levels to whatever version you currently have. That's the oldest version of your domain controllers. And then that will give you the best security and best group policies. There's a lot more group policies that were added with every version of Windows Server. All right, let's take a look at some demonstrations. I'm in Server Manager on an Active Directory domain controller, and I need to install a couple of rules in order to show how they're going to work with this migration. So I'm going to check the box for DHCP server, and I'm also going to check the box for print and document services. And I'll just go ahead and install those. Take a look when we go to install the print services. It offers some role services. Role services are always underneath the server roles. So these role services by default for print and document services is going to just be the print server. We can also add internet printing. Now this is really a popular item for some hotels who charge for printing documents onto paper. Sometimes they'll charge $1 a sheet or something like that. Then you have line printer daemon service, and that's going to enable for Unix type of printing. So I don't need any of those. I'm just going to go with the print server. Click next and click install. While I'm waiting for these to be installed, I'm going to go back into Server Manager. I'll just click close on this. And I'm going to go to Tools, and we'll go to Group Policy Management. So I've created multiple different group policies based on various different demonstrations and videos I've created over the last several months. And now I'd like to be able to move these group policies off to another location. This is a fairly simple procedure. Now you can see each one of these group policies, but these are just shortcuts. You see the little arrows pointing next to them. These are not actual physical locations of the group policies. The physical locations are in the folder called Group Policy Objects. Here's where they all live. These are just shortcuts pointing to where they live. So now what I'm going to do is go to the Group Policy Objects, right click, and choose to back up those group policies. So I can browse and choose the location. I'll choose the C drive. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll call it GPO Backup. And that's the one I'll choose, and choose Backup. So now it's backing up all my group policies, so I can keep them as a backup just in case I have any type of corruption where I can do a quick restore, or I can restore them to a whole other domain if I'd like to. And all my group policies were backed up to that location that I pointed out. So that was pretty simple. I'm just going to go ahead and close my group policies. And I'm going to go to Tools at the top and choose DHCP, which is one of those server roles that I had just installed. So DHCP will not work unless it's authorized. So I'm going to expand my DHCP, and I'm going to right click on the server itself and take a look. It's already authorized. So if you add DHCP to an Active Directory domain controller, it will automatically authorize itself. If you add it to a domain server, so not a domain controller, it will not authorize itself, and you'll have to right click on that server and choose authorize. Now if I no longer want it to be authorized, then I can certainly choose to unauthorize it, and it will stop handing out IP addresses. So I've already got a scope that I created on there previously with an address pool, and there's probably some leases and maybe some reservations, things like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this server, and I'm going to choose to back up my DHCP. And you can see it automatically creates a folder called DHCP, and then I added in the backup folder previously, and I can choose to create a new one, and I'll call this May 25 Backup. There we go. Click OK. And now DHCP has been backed up. I can also go back in and choose to restore. So if I go to my new server, set up DHCP, choose restore, it'll say, hey, where is that location? I can go ahead and choose it and then choose OK, and it will import it all back in. And then when I'm done with this server, I don't want to have it hand out any other IP addresses. I'll just choose to unauthorize it. And now, even though the scope is still there, everything is still there, it's just not authorized to do anything. And if I'd like, I can go in and go ahead and delete the scope as well. I would just right-click and choose delete. Notice deactivate is also there. If I choose to deactivate, it's just going to deactivate this one scope. If you have multiple scopes, those will continue to work. So if you unauthorize it, of course, none of them will work. So I'm going to choose to delete this scope. And if I'm going to hand out any new addresses, I'll need to add a new pool. Now, I've previously set this up with a failover relationship, so I've got to delete that first. But this just gives you a good idea of how to do that. Now let's go into Tools and go to Print Management. This was the other server role that I added in. And it's possible that in Windows Server 2022 it's installed by default. I can't recall off the top of my head. I know at least in 2019 it was installed by default. But in 2025 you definitely have to install it. All right, so it's, even though I had just installed it, I had previously installed it. So you're seeing some of these previous printers that I have in here. And we've gone over these printers in the past on how to add a printer, but I know it's been a while. So you can right click and you can export this information if you like. And it's just going to export a list. It's not really doing a complete backup here, but it does give you an export list if you'd like. Here's all the different drivers. And what's nice about this is you can add drivers for different versions of Windows Server. So you can add for, older versions, 32-bit. This is the 64-bit. This one is a combination. No, actually, this one's just a 32-bit, sorry. So it says x86. That means it's a 32-bit driver. So anytime you see x86, it's 32-bit. x64 is going to be a 64-bit driver. So why is it called x86? It has to do with the original Intel 8086 processor, and it was a 32-bit, so they decided to, go ahead and just continue to call it that. Technically, it was really 16-bit, but we're just calling it 32-bit because they continued improving it, and eventually it was used in 32-bit operating systems. All right, so I'm going to expand print servers. I only have the one print server, which is what you're going to see here. If I expand it, you can see the drivers. So the drivers all show up here, but then they also, show up here as well. Why is that? Well, that's because if I have multiple different print servers, it's going to combine all the print servers into this top area. So if I use different drivers in this location, you're going to see all the different servers combined into this one location. But I only have the one print server, which is why you see the same information twice. You can also see the ports that they're using. We can use COM ports, we can use USB ports, we can use network ports. Most of the time it's just going to be network ports, of course. And then printers themselves. Here's all the different printers. Let's add a printer. So I can right click and choose to add a printer. Most of the time it's going to be TCP/IP, but it's going to look for that printer. So if it can't find it, it's just going to take a really long time to time out. So I'm going to use an existing LPT. This is the old-fashioned type of printer port, just for an example. And I'll say, let's use an existing printer driver. Otherwise, I'd have to download something from the internet. And I'll say that this is a remote desktop easy print. How's that? Click Next. I'll leave everything else the same as it is. Next. It says it can't find it, so we're going to get that error. But that's how you install a printer, just in case you'd forgotten. And then you can see deployed printers. Deployed printers are basically printers that are going to be automatically added into group policy. To add a printer into group policy, you just find the printer that you'd like and then right click on it and choose deploy with group policy. So instead of going into group policy, management that I was just in just a little while ago, you can now do all this through here and it will show up as a group policy in Group Policy Manager. So I can click to browse to group policy. Here's all my group policy names that you saw earlier. I can also create a new group policy as well. There's my new group policy. And I'll call this printers. And that's where I want to deploy it. Now you can print actually, you can send this to a group policy per user or to a machine. So if you do it by user, then any computer the user logs into, this group policy will be applied and they'll have that printer added. Or you could go by machine, where basically it doesn't matter who logs into it, they're automatically going to have that printer. Ultimately, they kind of work the same way. You could also check both boxes if you'd like, but typically you choose one or the other and click add, and then apply or OK, and then it's going to automatically create that group policy and make the settings changes you need to have that deployed printer set up. And now you can see the printer is being deployed. So this is a great way to deploy printers quickly and easily if you're going to use the shared printer option. I'm going to close this, and now I'm going to go to Active Directory, Sites and Services. Now we've been in Sites and Services before, and I'm going to expand the default site name, click on the servers. Here you can see both of my servers. They're both 2025 Windows servers. They're both domain controllers. And I can replicate that information by double-clicking on NTDS settings. And you see this automatically generated replication. So if I go to the other server, we'll see the same thing, but it'll point back to the other server. So DCO2 points back to DCO1. And you can always right-click and choose to replicate now. And hopefully it'll replicate properly, which it did. Now this happens automatically on a regular basis, but if you're ever worried that the replication isn't working right, and you have the master role set up on a server that doesn't seem to be it seems to be working properly, then you could have a real problem. So you want to go into here just to double check that the replication works. Now if you have multiple different sites, you're going to add more sites. This is the default first site name, but most people rename it to something else. So we'll just call this one Clark, right? And then you might create a second one that's called something else, maybe named by location or something. So anyways, you want to make sure that you have the servers in the proper location and they are all replicating properly. Now if we go to Tools, Active Directory Domains and Trusts, here's where you set up those trusts. Now you can also set up those trusts using the Active Directory Migration tool. It allows the trust to be set up there, but you could also set up the trusts here. Well, the reason I'm in here now is because you want to make sure that you can have the latest and greatest forest and domain functional level. At the top, it gives you the option to raise the forest functional level. Now this is at 2025, which is as high as it goes. Also, they say you can't go back to an original functional level, but I've done it before, and you have to do it through PowerShell. Now, you can also go to the domain section and raise the domain functional level. So anytime you raise a level, make sure you raise both the domain and the functional level to the same level. Now, for Windows Server 2022, as I mentioned before, the domain and functional level is going to be 2016. They didn't think they were ever going to have to raise the functional level again. They thought everybody was going to move to Azure, and of course that just never happened and never will. So that's how you set up the latest and greatest domain and functional level, and this is also the location where you set up domains and trusts if you're not using the migration tool. Now let's go down into PowerShell, and I can right-click and choose Terminal, and anytime you do Terminal, automatically means PowerShell by default. So I'm going to clear the screen. And what I want to do is I want to get a list of who has the master roles. So I'm going to choose netdom for network domain, query, FSMO, or these are the master roles. Who's got them? Here we can see DCO1 has them. Now I'm on DCO1 right now. Let's say I want to move those to DCO2. Well, I can do that using what's called NTDS, Network, New Technology Domain Services Utility. So NTDS util. So I'm going to type in roles, connections. Now I realize you're not going to remember this, so hey, it's a good idea to save this video for later. Now I'm going to say connect to server, and I want to connect into li-dco2-2025. So I'm going to connect to that other server. Now I'm going to quit to go back up one level, and I'm going to press the Q for a question mark, and so you can see what I can do. So if for some reason DCO1 went down, I've got to have these 5 master roles on another server. Well, I can easily just seize those 5 roles. And then it'll automatically have them on the new server. Or I can transfer them if that old server is still running. So I'm going to transfer one of the roles right now. I'll transfer the PDC, which has to do with the clock and stuff like that. So I can just type in transfer PDC, enter, and say, hey, you sure you want to do this to DCO2? Yes, I do. So now if you take a look at this, you can see DCO1, DCO1, DCO2, DCO2 for the prime. This is stands for primary domain controller. It has to do with Windows NT4 in the 1990s. They were unable to get rid of this, so that's why it's still showing up. And it's still necessary. But I've transferred one of the roles to DCO2, and you can split these up amongst multiple different servers. It doesn't have to be all on one server. So I'm just going to leave that one there, and I'm going to click the Q for quit, and now I'm back to the regular command prompt. But I went ahead and moved just one of those master roles. And here you can see if I run the same netdom query, DCO2 is running that PDC. It shows it up there as well. So I'll exit out of here. And that will do it for all of the different types of demonstrations. So we went over some migration techniques, and you saw them doing various different types of tools where you can migrate and export and things like that. And I suggest that you go ahead and download the Active Directory migration tool and just go ahead and test it out in one of the extreme labs. You're not going to hurt anything. You can go ahead and use one of the labs from earlier part of the class if you'd like, and just sort of play with it a little bit, because at some point in your career, you're probably going to use that at least once and maybe even multiple times if you become a consultant. So that will do it for this week. I will see you again next Monday, and thanks for watching the video, and I'll talk to you soon. Don't forget, you can always contact me for help.